first we're gonna review the parallelogram. Just know that it's probably the most basic out of all the definitions. All right, in fact, all the other definitions say, oh, this has the same property as a parallelogram plus these. So parallelograms are quadrilaterals with 4 properties. They have opposite sides, congruent, and parallel, which you can see by those hash marks. All right, they have diagonals that bisect each other, so meaning that it cuts it into equal halves. That isn't drawn on here, but just to show you what that would look like. Right, the diagonals bisect each other, just imagine those are straight. We have both pairs of opposite angles are congruent. So if I were showing you that, I would put a hash mark through the opposite angles to show you that the opposite angles are congruent. Lastly is that consecutive angles are supplementary. So angles that are next to each other, like this way, those are supplementary. They equal 180 degrees. All right, I'm going to set up. All right, they're also supplementary this way too. Right, so those would also equal 180 degrees. Questions about that? All right, so we have rectangles, which have all the same properties as a parallelogram. So same properties as the first page, that was listed right here. Those are all from the page before. But then we have the additional rectangle properties, which are that they have 4 right angles and the diagonals are congruent. So before, in the parallelogram, the diagonals weren't necessarily congruent. In rectangles, they are. Questions about that? All right, so all rectangles are parallelograms, but not all parallelograms are rectangles. So just kind of be able to distinguish between the two. Now we have rhombus. So they have the same properties as a parallelogram, which are these ones right here. These are all the same as parallelograms. But the additional ones are that the 4 sides are congruent. The diagonals are perpendicular, so there should be right angles at the diagonals. And the diagonals bisect the angles. So like right here. I don't know if that's like just poorly drawn or I'm not sure. But these diagonals cut the angles into 2 equal halves. Questions about that? All right, so the more additional properties something has, the more specific it is to something. So if it's like just a few properties like parallelograms, then those are more broad, more stuff fits into those categories. Then we have squares, which are super specific. They have all 4 sides are congruent, all 4 right angles. Diagonals are perpendicular, so far it's also like a rhombus. The diagonals bisect the angles. And the diagonals are congruent. All right, not to mention that they have all the same parts as a parallelogram as well. All right, good so far. So then next we have other quadrilaterals like trapezoids. They're pretty specific. They just have 1 pair of opposite sides that are parallel to each other. So like these sides would be parallel to each other, the other sides wouldn't because they would intersect. And then we have 2 pairs of consecutive angles that are supplementary. All right. right? So we have two pairs of consecutive angles that when you add them together, you get 180 degrees. So I think it's like this one and this one would be supplementary to each other, and then this one and this one would be supplementary to each other. These would not be in that direction. All right, so any questions? See if there's any more. All right, one more. We have a kite, which has two pairs of adjacent sides being congruent. So the other one, like rectangles, where it's the opposite sides are congruent to each other. Well, now it's the sides that are next to each other that are congruent. The diagonals are perpendicular. And exactly one pair of opposite angles are congruent. So like these ones in the picture. All right, so there's not really a whole lot of other information that I can give you other than what's on your papers. So luckily you get to use your notes on test. So if you're confused between whether or not you can classify this item as a rhombus, square, rectangle, parallelogram, you have it in front of you to be able to figure that out. All right, your assignment, which I think you can finish in these last 25 minutes, is the 3.04 worksheet that's back here. Basically, you are going through each item, so I would probably go through the letters, like both pairs of opposite sides are congruent and parallel, and put that letter A in each box that it fits in. So for kite, do they have both pairs of opposite sides are congruent and parallel? All right, should be no, because only two pairs, or exactly one pair of opposite angles are congruent for kite, so you would not put A in the kite box. For trapezoid, you don't have both pairs are congruent and parallel. You only have one that is parallel. All right, so that wouldn't work for that. For parallelogram, you'd probably be able to say that. All right, it does say opposite sides are congruent and parallel. So just go through each box. You can use the letters more than once. And then you'll turn it into the basket when you are finished.